Part 3, Chapter 12, Inheritance. At birth, we are given just two things, two precious things which we are entrusted, above all else, to safeguard, a body and a soul. I have kept my body intact, more or less, over the years, ensuring the other, my soul, would always have a home to reside and be warm, until I foolishly trusted my soul in another's grasp. Since then, my body has endured many hardships, much of its vitality lost to protect something that no longer belonged to me. I have betrayed my one existence, all for the sake of wreaking havoc on the lives of casually narcissistic fiends parading as people. For what, exactly? Some redemption? Payback? No matter the excuse, it seems stupid now. Because in the end, all the choices I made that I believe to be reasonable and justified have led to my body and soul shredded and spilling onto the ground, watching my best friend face things far beyond her ability or comprehension, while I crumble as hardly anything more than a pile of discarded meat, kept alive only by an entity that has thoroughly invaded my only tether to this world in an attempt to claim it as its own. It's hopeless. Those words painted my soul, but I couldn't let it all fall apart. Not now. I embraced one final effort and buried my feet once again into the soil, somehow stumbling ardently forward. While my muscles dragged me in a daring sprint toward him, I felt a violent stabbing shoot through my bones. My legs suddenly locked up, stiff, and all the momentum sent me tumbling forward, crashing into the ground with embedding force. I felt my peeled flesh roll even more, the sting of newly exposed red flesh in a rushing attempt to tourniquet by Alice. I rested there, wheezing, eyes fluttering desperately open. I lifted my head, now within 15 feet of him. He arrogantly glared, a mixture of disappointment and intrigue on his face, a look I've been seeing all my life. Grinding frustration out of my throat, I bound my hand into a fist while the other arm remained limp from the damage. I pressed my knuckles into the dirt, charging up a flickering amount of energy to surge my skin once again. All I had left was mist and droplets, but I used them for all they were worth. A flash of bluish purple ignited my eyes, but only for a moment. I punched the ground, creating a tiny shockwave and propping myself up. Behind my wincing view, I could see myself, a child version of me, starved and broken. I panted heavily, lungs deflated and body hardly able to move. Still, with all my might, I picked myself up. Standing now, crooked and mangled, my arm fell by my side, while the other bent inward, fist dense and elbow sharp. I lifted my head with blood spilling from my lips and locked eyes with him. All the pain that I felt was secondary only to hatred. He raised a brow, impressed and panting heavily himself. A devilish grin split his face, and he spoke.
I know you are afraid, my child. Do not concern yourself with death. Not yet. Save your fleeting strength. There is another trial to face. It is only a matter of time.
He then unbound his weapon of darkness, the shadow blade used to threaten Tansu, and then extended her outward. She lifted out of his grip, suspended in the air by a telekinetic hold. Her body jerked and bounced with irregular breaths, unable to speak. My mouth hung open, and my raspy lungs displayed my defeat, but I continued to hold him in my view, screams present in my ears and a vile urge still attempting to overcome me. He added,
If you make another attempt for me, you will be cast aside. I do not wish to see you suffer any more than you already have.
My gnarled teeth separated. Shut your mouth, you rotten bastard! I started hacking violently, nearly falling forward but managing to keep myself rigid and upright. I used my arm to wipe blood from my mouth and shot him a fierce grin. I will never yield to you. I will never stay down when everything I care about is on the line. His lips tensed.
As brave as you are being, your confidence is misplaced. Listen close. If I wanted to kill you, you would never have transformed. If I wanted to avoid your attacks, I simply would have. This was never a fight,
he stated coldly. I huffed loudly, eyes dimming. So, everything was a test? A measuring of my capabilities?
This blood you and I shared, the compound of your hate and my will become the vessel to something grand indeed. Now I can say that I am certain.
Tanzu's whimpering pinched my ears. My hands started to tremble as I focused every ounce of myself into my fingertips. I felt the nails darken, overlay with the spiritual aspect of Alice's claws, but they wouldn't sprout. Alice spoke. It's no use. We're done. I struggled to move my lips. Don't you give up on me. Not you. She sighed, the bass of her voice much less than normal. Come on, Alice. One last attack. We can get him, I pleaded. I looked at Tansu, and we locked eyes. She was crying, and with her expression, I felt the emotions well up inside me. We lost. I failed her. I failed myself. As my body and mind slowly gave in to inevitable defeat, and the cold blanket of limbo attempted to secure me, I shifted back to Sin's eyes. Those faded, yellow, evocative eyes that buried themselves deep in my soul continued to terrify me. In his eyes, I could see everything. My whole life, and all of its failures. My bound fist dropped, and the arc in my back grew more defined. A long, exasperated breath slipped from my lips as my eyes shut. I felt nothing, heard nothing, and thought of nothing. Just waited for the end to claim me. But the longer I stood there, knees buckled and warm blood oozing down my skin, the more anxious I became when a final blow didn't come. Then, I felt something different. Something small yet infinite. A veil between he and I that brushed past my skin with a comforting, invisible aroma. A new taste on my tongue, and a distinct buzz in my skull. Sin spoke, but not to me.
I was beginning to wonder if I was being ignored.
My head still lowered, I opened my eyes up a pinch, enough to see a line of blood drip from a wound from my face. The droplet hit the ground and sent a rippling awareness through me. My head rose softly, dramatically, settling on the new shape between us. A stout posture, dirty purple nightgown, no shoes or socks, gray wrinkled skin, and cyan short hair. It was Chrism. Sin instructed.
The time is upon us. Quickly, dispose of this girl in the forest and gather the needed components. I will mend Kimberly enough for traversal. We break the seal tonight.
His voice was shaking with excitement and authority. A heat swelled all around us, tempered and wrought with some innate emotion I picked up on. Something that gestured to me, something tender. I started falling forward, but caught myself. Then my eyes caught a glimpse of Chrism's hand at her side. It was tight, trembling slightly. A fist. Chrism raised her head slightly. I decline. Sin glowered.
This is not a request. I will not humor your games. Do as I say.
Her fist became tighter, and the longer she went without responding, the angrier I felt him get, and that anger reflected in his tone.
I implore caution, Chrism. Denial is heresy.
I said no, she stated. Then, to my surprise, her fist unclenched and extended forward. I sensed a warble in the air as Tansu was then taken from Sin's invisible hold and carefully moved off to the side by a similar kinetic grip. Sin watched, brows becoming ever defined. Tansu was set down nearly 20 feet from our cluster, but she didn't attempt to move. She sat on her tailbone, knees bent upward and arms supporting her leaning weight. Horror-stricken. I stumbled to the side slightly, shifting my foot enough to keep me upright, but failing. I dropped to my knees, back straight and holding my ruined arm.
Think about what you're doing,
Sin growled.
Have you forgotten our destiny? I am not your enemy. I am and have always been your savior, just as I will be theirs.
Chrism lowered her hand and stared directly at him. Fierce stoicism sharpened her words. You deceived all in your wake. The lives you stole through me, the imbalance and destruction. No more. Your complex is a false prophecy, a road to chaos. Sin started to grin, evil yellow teeth bold and callous.
So, how long have you been keen?
His voice was now more twisted than before. She replied dryly, Long enough. You think yourself so clever, but you are not, Akram. You deceived even yourself in the end. He rolled his neck.
On the contrary, the end is on the horizon. It shall come to pass, with or without your consent, and regardless of your foolish endeavor.
He started twitching randomly, and one shallow limb erupted from over his shoulder, arching over him and aimed at Chrism. The tendril flickered, lacking a solid form.
Step aside, Chrism. Allow me this ritual and fulfill the martyr you were always meant to be. For peace. For humanity.
She inhaled softly, and the fraction of a second it took for her to move a finger, Sin shot the tendril forward. It pierced straight through the center of her chest, exiting out the back and wriggling close to my face. It faded and reformed multiple times, barely maintaining physicality for more than a few seconds before it just disappeared, leaving a dark red spot on her back. She wasn't fazed by this. Sin was panting, and now he crippled slightly. Chrism spoke, the slightest bit of confidence in her voice. You exhausted yourself. Then her hand shot forward and retracted back. With that motion, Sin was snagged by invisible energy and dragged toward her. As he skidded to her front and was forcibly halted, she flicked her wrist, which snapped him forward, creasing his spine and leaving his face mere inches from hers. I held my breath as she slowly clamped one hand on the top of his head. Alice interrupted my focus, her words rippling my vision. What the fuck is going on? I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. Still clutching to consciousness, I watched intently as a visible wave of distortion surrounded Sin's head and Chrism's body started to shake. She spoke softly. I will embrace the consequence of my afflictions. I will shoulder the nightmares of every verse, so long as your story ends in my hand, and the children you cursed receive the amnesty they deserve. He bolstered himself as much as he could, but the hold she had on him was indefinite.
You know not what you face, child.
His voice deepened even more, growing horrifyingly distorted as his eyes flared a bright yellow.
I am the Maker. I rid a last union of cataclysmic rebirth. The all-root of enigmatic suffering. All the darkness this world has ever known is but a shadow of the terror I will wrought. I am End.
He was drooling with crazed eyes. Chrism maintained her posture and whispered, And I am their vengeance. Instantly, her grip tightened and a shockwave pulsed from between them. A dirty yellow mist merged with a tender white fractal pattern and dissipated like smoke. He gave a final jerk and caused her to stumble to the side, now rotating 45 degrees and giving me a perfect view of them from the side. Chrism secured him and took his head in both hands, and with that, his expression suddenly went limp. Both eyes fell in different directions, and his jaw fumbled loosely. It was faint, but I could hear a fizzy breath erupt from his throat. Chrism closed her good eye, and then to my surprise, her damaged eye peeled open, revealing a bright purple glow from the iris. A dark purple mist began to emit from her hand and surrounded Sin's skull. He gurgled, and blood started to drool from his eyes and nose. Then, a tiny contraction from her hand caused his head to explode, sending chunks of skull and brain soaring in every direction. Tansu squirmed away to avoid the rain of blood, while also shielding her eyes from the cruel action. The ground quickly became littered with a chilling display of brutal homicide as the wet chunks splattered all around us. I sat there at a loss for words and watched as she relaxed and the body fell to the ground with a disgusting splash. Alice and I were stricken by silent shock, reeling from the sound of his head popping and the overall context of what the hell just happened. Within a minute, his corpse and all the scattered pieces started to make weird popping noises, like a cooking pot of grease. I remained where I was, mired by disbelief and unable to conjure a single word. Chrism stared emptily at the body, both arms now drenched in gore and posture lax. "Holy shit," Alice mumbled. As she spoke, Chrism looked at us, the animosity completely gone. She was docile, or so it seemed. My mouth was agape, eyes half closed with the pain, and my whole body shaking, now for a whole new reason. "What did—" His body held my attention. Fearfully, I stared and imagined my head popping like that. "I don't understand. I thought you were his right hand," I questioned. She looked down at his body with a loathing stare. "I was." "Then how? Why did you kill him?" Alice asked worriedly, sharing my valid concern that she was going to target us next. She lifted her hand up and stared at the dripping gore, then began sloppily whipping it to the ground, trying to remove the stain. "Sin never intended for me to exist." She looked down at her left side, the scarred side. "Though I am still not sure it was entirely accidental. I think he knew, somewhere deep inside. A silent guide, not so dissimilar to what I had for so long. In any case, this end had been dictated long before today." Alice spoke up. "I don't understand. If you could have killed him, then why were you helping him? Why were you killing my siblings all this time?" Chrism tensed her arm, opening and closing the hand. "I could not have killed him before now. This needed to unfold, precisely as it did." I interrupted. "Chrism, what the hell are you? You're not just Tuffle. I felt it. I felt him." Alice questioned. "You felt him? What does that mean?" Chrism's nostrils flared. "You always surprise and impress me, Kimberly. Even now, you could sense it. Above your Tuffle, even. Yes, it is true. I harbor some of Sin's own power, a fraction that he transferred to save my life so long ago. The anima that exists today is a result of experimentation, a desperate search to stabilize what would prove fatal. But that is a story for another time." She partially rotated her body, directing her gaze to Tansu off to the side. I followed her view and locked onto her. Right away, my face got hot. She was holding her ribcage tenderly and watching the two of us with a pained face. She was messed up in human standards. In that momentary pause, I came to a realization. Sin was just toying with us. The whole time. We had no chance of ever beating him, did we? I groaned the words out. Chrism replied quickly. "This battle had high purpose. The Sin you faced was nowhere near his true potential. He is less than half of what he should be, what he wanted to be. This quest of his was meant to restore him, and you two stopped that from coming to fruition. We needed exactly you to rise against him, with drive and purpose. Enough fuel to convince him to reach for his destiny, she explained. While she was talking, I could see the pieces of Sin literally melt away. His body had almost vanished into a cloud of particles that seemed to flow into Chrism herself. I tried to focus on her words and this phenomenon. She didn't seem to notice. I wobbled my head. It's all just so much. I don't understand how we got here. Why you wanted him dead. What the fucking point of it all was. She spoke slow and quiet. I know that to you all, this seems to be a contained instance. But for me, this has been ongoing for a very long time. Your birth, the first link to the ditch, and the power you adopted and nurtured all your life. You became the linchpin to our frantic plan. My special interest. I struggled with the pain. Why me? What makes me, us, so special? She didn't smile, but I could tell she spoke with some faint fondness. Sin was not aware of your dormant power, and he did not understand the bond you two shared. It is exceedingly rare for Tuffle and the host to understand one another, and even more so for the two to work together. Having a common goal, stakes to risk everything for, and a genuine soul was enough to wear him down. That is why I chose you, Alice. She perked at this. You chose me? I'm getting sick of asking this, but what does that mean? I was the one who pulled you from the ditch and put you in Sin's hand that night, she said casually. Alice shouted, You pulled me from the ditch? And you... I winced. Please, stop yelling. Chrism continued. The conditions to your birth, just as all the others, was planned months in advance. Sin had already prepared another Tuffle for Kimberly, pre-establishing a link to a section of the ditch containing a readied enema. However, I had planted a snare. When he called upon the enema, yours would respond in its place. You may recall how hard it was for you in there, always last to get a soul fragment, never completely satisfied with what you had, starving. Accept my apology, for it was I who let you suffer. Alice snarled, recalling her turbulent incubation. I fought tooth and nail for any shred of a soul in there. I thought I was cursed. There were times when I believed I would wither away. She held confused fury in her breathing. I specifically chose fragments to feed to you. It was necessary, trust me. Without my interference, I fear you would have been no better than the rest, she confessed. Chrism took a breath and paused, waiting for us to comment, but we didn't. She continued. That is why you did not come to this world with a name. He had yet to assign you one. He did not know you existed. So, I did, though you were never granted it. I felt Alice tighten up. You gave me a name? My chest ran cold as her soul shivered in anticipation. Distrust, loathing, and anger all mixed in a boiling pot of emotion. I quite like your adopted name more. The name I chose feels hollow now, given your life. Alice growled. Tell me. Are you certain? She looked at Alice through my eyes, and Alice stared right back. I realized in that moment that Tansu was only getting part of this conversation, if she was even listening. Chrism sighed through her nose, thinking, Very well. Your name is Reus. Alice was shaking inside, mixed around in ways she hadn't experienced. Her life, her purpose, was twisted for someone else's purpose, just like mine. But she didn't know how to cope. As a Tuffle, she was designed for hunger and blood, It's how her brain is wired. But in her life, that had become almost secondary. I could feel her searching herself, questioning if her thoughts and actions were truly her own. She took a retreating step in my head, and her static presence mellowed to a low hum. My mouth went dry, and inversely, my nostrils became wet. It would seem her conflicted emotions and my own met somewhere in the middle. I gave no hesitation and let my head fall forward. My hair was strewn about and sticky with blood chunks. I cried. I cried for a minute or two. So, what happens now? I asked through tears. She stood beside me and faced the direction I was facing, like we were both looking at a sunset that wasn't there. Hauntingly casual, she said, "Now, the Tuffle will begin to die." "They die?" I repeated, voice hoarse. "Yes. Each anima harbors a crack in its shell that allows essence absorption. Sin regularly casts a spell to mend every anima back to a sliver, for if it is sealed entirely, the Tuffle cannot absorb its siblings. If left unmended, they crack apart and die." I was presented with the image of Lyomic's anima and how it was cracked. I sniffled. "What about you? You have some of his power and an anima. What will happen to you?" "I will endure. My repentance has only just begun." While we talked, I almost forgot Tansu was still right in front of me, watching us, listening intently. I searched for another question, but came up short. Then my eyes fell to Tansu a short distance away. When I looked at her, she gave me a